Some people grow up in homes where everyone is present, yet no one is truly there. Where voices fill the rooms, but emotional silence fills the air. Where a child learns, quietly and early, that their feelings are too subtle to be seen, and their inner world too soft to be heard. Growing up emotionally unnoticed does not leave obvious scars. It leaves quiet ones. Invisible ones. The kind that shape how a person learns to speak, love, trust, and exist. And as the years pass, the child becomes an adult who feels strangely separate from life, always near connection, but never fully inside it. Always almost understood, but not quite. This documentary explores the lifelong echo of that early absence, not with judgment, but with gentle clarity and a hope that awareness itself becomes a soft form of healing. Chapter 1. The first quiet realization before a child understands language: they understand presence. They sense when a caregiver's eyes pause with genuine interest, and when those same eyes slide past them as if nothing important is there. For the child who grows up emotionally unnoticed, this becomes the first quiet truth: attention can be given without ever truly landing. At first, it is not painful. It is simply confusing. A child naturally reaches out, with laughter, with questions, with small invitations to be known. But when the world around them remains preoccupied or emotionally distant, those early attempts slowly fade. Not because the child stops wanting connection, but because they start to believe that wanting it is pointless. Over time, something subtle forms inside them, a soft pulling away, barely noticeable from the outside. They become polite, easy, undemanding. They try not to take up emotional space. They learn to solve their confusion alone, to carry their excitement quietly, to fold their disappointments so neatly that even they forget where they hid them. And as the years pass, the child develops a strange ability to feel deeply, yet express almost nothing. To notice everything, yet reveal very little. To stay close enough to not be forgotten, yet far enough to not be truly known. This is the first layer of growing up emotionally unnoticed, the quiet, internal shaping that happens before the child even realizes it's happening. A kind of emotional camouflage. A survival strategy that begins long before the word lonely enters their vocabulary, but slowly becomes the word that explains everything that comes after. Waxing Crescent Moon Chapter 2. Where the silence began. Emotional neglect rarely begins with cruelty. It begins with people who never learned how to listen inwardly, raising children who quietly inherit the same silence. Many emotionally unnoticed children grow up in homes that appear ordinary, a place where meals are cooked, routines are kept, and life moves in predictable rhythms. But beneath the surface lives an emotional distance so subtle that even the adults in the home do not recognize it. Sometimes the parents are overwhelmed, carrying financial stress, unresolved trauma, or the weight of their own unmet needs. Sometimes they grew up in strict cultures where emotions were considered weakness, or in families where practical survival mattered more than emotional attunement. And sometimes, they simply do not know what it means to truly see a child's inner world because nobody ever saw theirs. So the child learns early that affection must be earned, not offered freely. That emotional expression must be small, digestible, quiet. That being good is safer than being real. And the parent, believing they are doing enough, never notices the gap widening between them. Not out of indifference, but out of unawareness. A kind of generational echo, distance passed down like an heirloom. In this space, the child begins to understand something they cannot yet articulate: that love can exist without emotional presence, that family can exist without recognition, and that safety can coexist with loneliness. This is where the silence begins. Not as a single moment, but as a slow drift, one that shapes a child before anyone realizes it is happening. Brain Chapter 3. The invisible psychology. The impact of growing up emotionally unnoticed is rarely seen in childhood. It becomes visible later, woven into reactions, relationships, and the unspoken rules a person carries inside themselves. But beneath these patterns lies a quiet, predictable psychology. Attachment theory describes how a child forms their first blueprint of connection. When emotional attunement is inconsistent or absent, the brain adapts. It learns to mute its own needs to avoid disappointment. It treats closeness as unpredictable, something to approach with caution rather than ease. The nervous system adjusts as well. Children who aren't emotionally recognized often develop heightened sensitivity to subtle shifts, tone changes, pauses, silences, micro-expressions. They become experts at reading others, not to manipulate, but to survive. To anticipate emotional weather before it arrives. Over time, their identity forms around what is safest: self-reliance, invisibility, quiet competence. They begin to feel responsible for maintaining harmony, as if their existence must never add weight to a room. This kind of emotional mapping follows them into adulthood. They may struggle to name their own feelings, not because the feelings are missing, but because nobody ever mirrored them back. The brain simply never learned the language. This is why they often appear calm, resilient, or unfazed even when something inside them is aching. Their coping mechanisms are invisible armor, meant to protect, yet slowly distancing them from others and from themselves. The psychology of being emotionally unnoticed is not dramatic. It is quiet, adaptive, logical. A series of small adjustments the mind makes to survive in an environment where emotional presence is scarce. Last quarter Moon Chapter 4, the inner tug-of-war. Adulthood often reveals what childhood tried to hide. For the person who grew up emotionally unnoticed, this is where the inner conflict becomes unmistakable, a quiet tug-of-war between longing and self-protection. On one side lives a deep desire to be understood, to feel chosen, to be held in someone's emotional awareness. Not dramatically, not urgently, but in the soft, everyday ways that make a person feel real. On the other side lives fear, not of people, but of the vulnerability that closeness demands. Because closeness has never felt simple. It has always been unpredictable, a place where attention arrives without depth, and disappears without explanation. So the adult learns to stay partially hidden. They offer pieces of themselves, enough to maintain connection, never enough to risk disappointment. When someone moves closer, they pull back. When someone pulls away, they move closer. A rhythm built from childhood. Always adjusting, never settling. Relationships become confusing terrain. They may feel undeserving of care, yet overly responsible for keeping others comfortable. They may crave emotional intimacy, yet shut down when it finally appears. Not because they don't want it, but because their nervous system does not know what to do with it. And beneath it all, a quiet belief lingers: if I am fully seen, something will be lost: respect, stability, love, or even myself. This internal tug-of-war is not weakness. It is the natural consequence of navigating a world with an emotional map drawn in childhood, one that still whispers old rules long after the environment has changed. Waning Crescent Moon Chapter 5, the moment something breaks, there comes a point when the quiet strategies that once protected a person begin to feel too heavy to carry. For many who grew up emotionally unnoticed, the turning point is not dramatic. It is rarely a loud crisis or a sudden revelation. Instead, it arrives quietly, a private moment when something inside finally whispers, this pattern is no longer working. Sometimes it happens in the presence of love. A partner who gently asks, "What are you feeling right now?" And the person realizes they do not know how to answer. Not because the feeling is absent, but because it has never been given a name. Sometimes it appears through loss: a friendship that fades, a relationship that ends, a moment where the familiar distance costs something they didn't want to lose. And in the silence that follows, they recognize the echo of childhood, the same emotional invisibility, repeating itself in adulthood. And sometimes the realization comes from sheer exhaustion. From always being the strong one, the understanding one, the one who asks for nothing. A tiredness settles in the bones, the kind that can't be ignored. This turning point is not about blame. It is about clarity. The gentle understanding that the emotional absence they carry did not begin with them, and therefore, it does not have to end with them either. For the first time, the person sees their patterns not as flaws, but as adaptations. And in that recognition, a small space opens inside, a space where something new, something softer, is finally allowed to enter. Full Moon Chapter 6, learning to be seen. Healing from a childhood of emotional invisibility does not arrive all at once. It unfolds slowly, quietly, almost the way the original wound was formed. Not through grand breakthroughs, but through small, consistent moments of being seen. For many, the first step is learning to notice their own inner world. Not to analyze it, not to justify it, but simply to acknowledge that it exists. Feelings that were once muted begin to surface in soft waves: the warmth of being appreciated, the sting of disappointment, the steadiness of comfort. Emotions that were once unfamiliar start to develop outlines. The work of healing is not about opening up dramatically. It is about safety. Trust built slowly, like learning the rhythm of a new language. They choose people who feel steady, who do not demand vulnerability, but create space for it. Over time, the person begins to experiment with emotional presence. To express a small truth rather than hiding it. To hold eye contact a little longer. To stay in the conversation a moment after the instinct to withdraw appears. These are not small acts, they are rewritings of an internal script written long ago. And with each attempt, something shifts. Not dramatically, but meaningfully. The body learns that being seen does not always lead to disappointment. The mind learns that connection can be steady. The heart learns that it no longer needs to shrink to fit the space it is given. Healing, here, is simply this, the slow recognition that one's emotional world deserves to exist in the presence of others. Sun behind small cloud chapter 7, the echo softens even after healing begins, the past does not disappear. It lingers softly, like a faint echo at the edge of one's awareness. But something fundamental changes, the echo no longer defines the person. It becomes a reminder, not a ruler. In adulthood, moments arise that reveal how far they've come. Someone asks how they feel, and instead of freezing, they pause and answer truthfully. Someone offers support, and instead of turning it away, they let it in. The small child inside, the one who learned to stay quiet, unnoticed, finally begins to relax. Not completely, but enough to feel that the world can hold them. This final chapter is not about perfection or completion. It is about integration. Understanding that emotional invisibility shaped their early years, but does not need to shape their entire life. The person begins to trust their own presence, to feel that they matter in a room, that their emotions carry weight, that their inner world is worthy of recognition. And with that trust comes a quiet transformation, relationships become gentler, the nervous system softens, and moments of connection are no longer met with fear, but with curiosity. The echo of being emotionally unnoticed will never vanish completely. It is part of their story. But its power fades as new experiences form, experiences where they are seen, heard, and held. In the end, the echo becomes something else entirely, not a wound, but a reminder of how far tenderness can reach when someone finally learns that they are allowed to take up emotional space in the world.